Saskia woke up, still in her bed. She was drenched. Not just her face, but her hair and clothes, everything soaked through. From the rain? She wondered. But that's impossible. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it hammering against her chest. She couldn't recall ever remembering a dream in such detail, such exquisite and alarming detail. If she shut her eyes, she could still see the lamps and statues. She could still smell the noxious odor of burning whale oil. She had memorized the exact color of Robert Cornelius's eyes, green-gray, like the New Haven harbor. She tasted a bead of liquid that rolled off a lock of her hair. It was salty. She was covered in sweat, not rainwater. It was only a dream, she told herself. That's a quote from Mercury Boys by Chandra Prasad. This is YA Book Chat, and I'm your host, Leah Stuhler. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of YA Book Chat. I am excited to have you here. Thank you so much for listening. As always, thank you to all of my Patreons for all of your continued support and helping me to keep the podcast going. Today, I get to bring you another author interview. I have so privileged, you guys, to be able to have so many of these lately. I really love when I get the chance to interview authors and pick their brains about their books. And this is another very exciting book that we have to talk about. Today, I'm going to be talking about the book Mercury Boys with Chandra Prasad. And this book was just released in August. Chandra is also the author of the YA book Damselfly, which has actually been compared to The Lord of the Flies and gets used in schools as curriculum sometimes, which is awesome. She is also the author of the book On Borrowed Wings, which tells the story. It's inspired by the life of Amelia Earhart, as well as the book Breathe the Sky. So please help me welcome Chandra Prasad to YA Book Chat. Welcome, Chandra.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
You're welcome. I am really excited to have you here. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I've been an author for most of my adult life, which is exciting. And some years ago, probably about 5 years ago, I decided to switch from writing general fiction. I'd written several novels that have a historical slant to them, but they were mostly for the adult market. I switched from those to writing YA. And that's been really rewarding for a few reasons. Probably most of all because I really enjoy talking to teens, and I've gotten to visit a lot of schools. And so it's been a really good experience.
I love both YA and adult books, but I've really, obviously, my podcast, I've really gotten into YA more. I actually work at a middle school. I'm a middle school teacher. So I love seeing when the students come in with books and it's like a book that I've read or that I know, and I can chat about it with them. I love it because a lot of the middle schoolers, while they read middle grade, they also tend to read up and read YA a lot. So it's fun to be able to be in the school environment, like you were saying too, and get to talk to them about the books.
Oh, definitely. And they will tell you exactly what they think, which is nice too. There are no filters with middle school and high school students. They'll tell you what they think, and it's kind of refreshing, and they'll be very thoughtful and honest about questions and comments. And I have a teen myself. I have a younger child also, but my teen, I see what he's reading and how he approaches literature and books. And I'm delighted to see that, despite all of the technology and the proliferation of screens, kids are definitely still reading.
Yeah, I'm always really encouraged by that too. And my husband and I are trying to instill a love of reading in our boys. And, whenever one of my students says to me, "Oh, I hate reading," I'm like, "No, that is not what I want to hear." So it is, like you said, it's really encouraging when I do have students who come in and are just have their noses in their books, and it's great. I love it. Well, why don't you tell everybody what Mercury Boys is all about?
Sure. So Mercury Boys is about a group of modern day girls who make a startling discovery. And this discovery is that if they touch liquid mercury and the old photographs known as daguerreotypes, they can actually visit the people in those photographs. but the hitch is that they can only see them in their dreams. And the book has a bit of everything in it. There are historical interstitials that take the reader back to the mid 1800s when daguerreotypes were popular. There's a lot about female friendship and relationships and how female adolescence is as complex as it's ever been. Mm-hmm. And, there's definitely a little like sci-fi woven in there too, because, I guess you'd call it low fantasy in that the story is mostly realistic, but you have this supernatural element in terms of the photographs and the visiting to the past. So there's like an element of time travel that's woven into the realistic fiction.
Yeah. And it is such a great story. I was like hooked on it as soon as I started reading it. And part of the reason is because it does combine all of those things, which interests me. I've always been really interested in history and discovering more about history and different time periods. So I loved that it has that aspect to it. And then time travel. I mean, I just love time travel. So, and again, like you were saying, exploring those adolescent female relationships. I mean, there's so much there. Like, I remember being a teenage girl and my word, stuff was complicated. So I just loved that the book included all of those things. And it's also a very unique story. Like I've never read anything like this before. So where did you come up with the idea for this?
Yeah, so the seed of the idea was planted probably 6 or 8 years ago when a story made national news about a guy named Robert Cornelius who supposedly took the first selfie. And in fact, Robert Cornelius was this inventor and photographer who lived in the mid 19th century. And he specialized in daguerreotypes for a while. And he took this really arresting, cool photo of himself. And at the time, and certainly throughout his life, he had no idea that this photo would resonate or achieve, a bit of fame by being this first selfie. But I remember seeing it in the news and thinking, that's a really cool photo. I want to learn more about this guy. And I researched Robert Cornelius. He lived in Philadelphia, and he was like this Renaissance man. He did photography and he invented things and had a million patents. And then his bread and butter was this huge lighting store that he actually kept expanding because he kept inventing new ways of providing lighting. So he was really interesting. And another thing I learned about him in terms of the photography is that in order to make daguerreotypes, which are very complex to make, you need to be something of a chemist because you are dealing with very dangerous chemicals. And one of them is mercury. So somehow this idea of mercury and daguerreotypes coalesced into this story of Mercury Boys. And one thing I'll add is that it was also very interesting to research the history of mercury because throughout time, it's been associated with such interesting things. It's been associated with alchemy, with immortality, with fertility, you name it. Depending on where you are in history and what the culture is, people have believed that mercury has these magical properties. And it was also perceived as this land between the living and the dead because a lot of cultures use mirrors as this portal between the living and the dead, and mercury has this quality, this mirror-like quality. So anyway, all of these things kind of came together in my head and the story emerged from there.
That's really cool. I love that. And I was going to ask you about research, like how much research you had to do for this story, because there's obviously a lot of information, not just about Robert Cornelius and the time period that he lived in too, but about all of the other Mercury boys and Cassie, the one Mercury girl. So Robert Cornelius, you were just saying, was a real person who existed. Were the other ones in the book as well?
So that is a great question. So in the book, if you see the book, the paper copy, and I believe also the digital book, you can actually look at the daguerreotypes. And Robert Cornelius, like I said, was a real person. But these other daguerreotypes in the book have no identifying information. So we have no idea who they were, who these people were. And so the other characters who, like you were just mentioning, are there, but they're completely fictional. I mean, these photos were other people, but these are people who have kind of been lost to the past.
Okay. That makes sense. And I did look at the pictures of the daguerreotypes, and it's so great having those pictures at the start of the book too, because it really pulls you into the story more, and helps you experience like what the girls are experiencing when you've got these pictures of them to go along with it. But I love that Robert Cornelius is a real person. I think that's fantastic. I would love to, if I were going to write something like this, which I'm not a writer, but I would love to be able to take a person out of history like that and be able to write about them. Kind of a fun question, because I've noticed that, your other books too, like you said earlier, were about things that have happened in the past in history as well. So have you ever thought about what it might be like to travel back in time? Like, do you have a time period that you would go back to if you could?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Are you passionate about writing or just love the arts? Tune in to the Poetry Podcast with A. Discover the latest trends in the industry, enjoy insightful book reviews, participate in Q&As, listen to captivating poetry readings, and get inspired by author interviews. We release episodes on the first 3 Thursdays of each month. Don't miss out. Come check us out at the Poetry Podcast with A.
Not sure. I think that in writing this book, and all the girls go back to anywhere between 1850 and 1875, depending on who the character is. I learned a lot about what was available at that time and what wasn't. Mm-hmm. And one of the girls named Adrienne, she goes back and she visits a Civil War soldier in a field hospital. And in writing that, I learned just how horrible these field hospitals were, because antibiotics weren't developed. There were no painkillers. If there was a wound or whatever, all kinds of really quack-like things were used. And there was a lot of also it wasn't modern medicine. It was nowhere near modern medicine. And I think in reading that, it made me pretty sure that I would never want to live in that time, this 1850s time, but in the 19th century. But yeah, I think if I could go back in time, there are a few times I would like to visit, but none of those times would I want to actually stay.
Yeah. When I read Adrienne's dreams, those sections of the book, I was speechless. Like, I didn't realize what it was like, those were some of, I think her Mercury Boy experience was probably one of the most eye-opening for me, to realize what a field hospital would have been like, and how unsanitary they really were and how horrible it was. That was very eye-opening. That's definitely, I've always kind of been fascinated with the Civil War too. That's one of the time periods that I've done some studying of myself, but yeah, I still even didn't come across that, so that was very interesting. And I definitely would not want to travel to that time period either.
Yeah. Just to give an example, more men actually died in these field hospitals than they did on the battlefield. So, an enormous number of men died at these field hospitals. And that's because they were basically giving each other diseases in these very close quarters, which were, like you said, very unsanitary. The same primitive tools would be used on all of the men with no cleaning in between. So it was you didn't want to be in one of these Civil War field hospitals.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the characters too, and the girls and their relationships. So our main character, Saskia, and her friends, each one of them kind of has a rough family life in a way. Why was that important element for you to include? Because I kind of feel like if some of them didn't have that rough family background, the story might have been completely different.
Yeah. So yeah, there are definitely some family issues going on. There's two girls who are sisters, and Paige and Sarah Beth, and their parents are just missing in action. They're never home, so these girls are kind of latchkey kids. Another one, the main character Saskia, her parents are going through a very, very acrimonious divorce, and she's disenfranchised from her mother for various reasons. Another girl has a single working mom who is deeply religious and thus sort of judgmental. So these are circumstances that definitely make the girls more vulnerable in a way. But I also think that this is kind of more often than not the norm, a lot of kids have these issues to deal with in their lives. And, they'll need a lot of resilience to kind of keep going and to be successful in school and socially and whatnot. But I think these girls, not only being teenagers when you're already very impressionable, but also having found each other, and they all seem to have this almost toxic, they develop sort of toxic relationships with one another. This is probably not a healthy group to be in. Mm-hmm. So those things all contribute to a very, very tumultuous situation.
Definitely. And I will say that two of them, I don't want to say which two, because I don't want to kind of indirectly spoil anything, but I will say that two of them were like mean girls on steroids in a way. Like, it's like, wow, these two make Regina George look mild, but it was also like kind of scary reading that in a way too, like, because it made me glad that I have boys, only because I remember being that age and wanting to, like Saskia and Adrienne, all of them wanting to feel accepted, and be a part of something. And so it's like, well, what lengths will you go to in order to grab that acceptance, and it's something I think a lot of girls, young teenage girls, really struggle with. And then they have to decide, well, if they're following along with the crowd, how do they learn to take a stand for themselves? Can they learn to stand up for themselves, like one of the girls, Lila in this does, and not be talked into doing everything and just going along with everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to give the listeners some context, the main character, Saskia Brown, she's coming from Arizona, where her mother has basically had an affair. And I'm not giving too much away because this happens right in the beginning of the book. Mm-hmm. And she moves with her dad to a fictional town in Connecticut. And everything is hard for her. She's in a new place. She's displaced. She's with only one parent. She has no friends. And she's entering school at a time when all of these high school friendships and relationships have already been established. So she doesn't really have this group to lean on. And then coming into that situation, and like you said, meeting these mean girls on steroids, I love that description. Yeah, it's a recipe for trouble. And that's exactly what happens. I mean, at first, they form this club, and it's like a secret society. No one else knows about it. And at first it seems like just a great, fun way to spend the summer. But as time goes by and the truth about some of these girls come out, and as they take more and more risks with this Mercury and with this idea of, visiting these boys and girls from the past, as this happens, we know that the road they're going down is not going to end in a good place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's, they have to make these choices. How do they decide what they're going to do and what they're not going to do? So I don't know if this was intentional or not. I was kind of wondering if you set out to try and include like how to teach adolescent girls about the, making wise decisions and not just following along, or did that just kind of naturally come along as the story developed?
Well, I think it kind of naturally came along as the story developed, because I've learned that when you try to teach or be didactic in fiction, it just comes across as not believable. Nobody wants to be kind of preached to, but I think these characters were believable enough, and we would see people kind of like these in any high school, although perhaps not quite as toxic. The fact that Saskia dealt with them pretty well by the end, and again, I don't want to give anything away, I think might show by example that this is important. It's important to stand up for yourself, and it's important to have a sense of worth that is separate from what other people think of you, and it's important to have a lot of self-respect. So hopefully that those things shine through without being forced on anyone.
I feel like they do, definitely. I mean, it was there for sure, but it wasn't, forceful at all. I think that comes through really well. It's a great theme and message to have in the book.
Oh, good. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. I was kind of wondering, because sometimes when I read certain books, it just kind of triggers in my mind. And so I'm just curious, were any of the girls based on anybody who or like knew growing up yourself as an adolescent?
The only person that was kind of based on someone I know was the friend that Saskia had in Arizona, who was briefly described. I did have a friend like that, who I'm not going to give anything more away, just because God forbid that person hear this podcast. But pretty much everyone else was just, coming from my imagination. It didn't really, they weren't based on anyone.
Okay, cool. What were some of the challenges that you faced when writing this story?
The biggest challenge was probably the liquid mercury aspect, because, the girls end up touching this and handling liquid mercury, which we know is incredibly toxic. It's a neurotoxin. It affects just about every part of the body. It's bad news. And I by no means wanted to advocate girls being anywhere near liquid mercury, let alone kind of use it the way they did. So that was hard, and I wasn't sure how that would go over. But interestingly enough, now that the book has come out, it's been out for about almost 2 weeks now. What I've heard and what I've read is that is not something that people are really worried about. I haven't heard actually a single person mention, God forbid, someone actually touch mercury. So that's good. That makes me feel a lot better. And one thing about mercury that I don't think I mentioned this before, but in the 19th century, it was very commonly ingested. There was a pill called blue mass, and it was given for just about everything from indigestion to headaches to depression. This blue mass pill was just doled out right and left. And some of the most influential people in history were taking mercury for a good portion of their lives. People like Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin and Louisa May Alcott. And what's interesting is that if you look back in history at the time, say that the number of months or years that these people were taking mercury, you do see substantial behavioral changes. So it makes me think, like, how much of a role did mercury play during that time? I mean, how did it affect people in ways that we'll never know?
Right. Especially because, nowadays you just hear all kinds of negative things about it, like pregnant women aren't even supposed to eat tuna fish or much tuna fish, because of the mercury, like fish in general. So, and there's so much about it that's like, no. So it's just kind of blows my mind to think that people used to just take it in a pill like that. Like it was okay. Yeah. And you do have to think, okay, what kind of effects did this have on people? Okay, you said Abraham Lincoln was somebody who took it. I would love to now go back and do some more research on Abraham Lincoln and be like, okay, did he have any kind of medical issues that might have come about as a result of this? I mean,
in fact, he did. Yeah, in fact, he did. You'll see that. Thank God, like right before the Civil War, he kind of stopped taking it, because when you have a leader, guiding the country through this incredibly hard, tumultuous time, the last thing you need is someone that's taking a poison, right?
Right.
But yeah.
Fortunately, he stopped and kind of, figured things out for the Civil War. So
Yeah,
that was good.
right.
I haven't read your other books yet. So I'm not, I don't know what their point of view in those books are, like as far as, because this book, obviously we have a modern point of view with Saskia and the girls going back in time to relive historical events. Is that something you did in your other books, or are the other books take place like in that time period?
Yeah, some of my previous books were historical. So one is called Breathe the Sky. Again, it's Breathe the Sky. And it's actually about Amelia Earhart's last attempt at circumnavigating the globe. I kind of imagine it from her perspective. And I did, as you can imagine, a lot of research on her, which was just fascinating. Another one of my books is about a girl who goes to Yale University in the 1930s in the guise of her brother, who ended up dying because she had to go as a boy because Yale didn't allow girls into their college until 1969. So again, I got to do a lot of really exciting research. And then one of my books, Death of a Circus, is about one of the last, well, it's fictional traveling circus troupe, but it reimagines, what it was like to be one of these last circuses traveling the country by train. And there's a huge culture behind that, a huge like allure and mythology built around early circuses. So again, that was great to research. But my last novel before this one is Damselfly. And like you mentioned earlier, it's been compared to Lord of the Flies. And that one is set squarely in the present.
Okay.
So I guess I've had a little of both.
Okay, cool. Can you, just going off topic just a little bit for a second, can you tell everybody a little bit about what Damselfly is about?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I also want to mention that I'm half Asian, and so I make it a point of including mixed race characters in my books because although the youth population in this country has a huge multiracial segment to it, in fact, more multiracial kids are born than any other single race nowadays. The children's and YA book markets barely have any representation for this group. So at last count, less than 1% of books were either by a multiracial author or featured a significant multiracial character. So I made it a point in both Damselfly and Mercury Boys to have a multiracial protagonist. And Damselfly it's a survival story, and it has girls and girls of color at the center of the book, but it shares a lot of similarities with Lord of the Flies in that it takes place on a tropical island, and there are some of the same themes of survival and what is the essence of mankind, are we good or evil? It has a lot of those themes, and I've been very pleased that schools have quite a few schools are using Damselfly in the classroom, often as a twin or a parallel read with Lord of the Flies. And this, as a teacher, maybe you've seen this, but it's a phenomenon that's taking place more and more, where teachers are taking classic books from the Western canon and pairing them with modern young adult books. And what the research has found is that when given the choice of reading only the classic or only the young adult book or both, kids by and large love reading them both and comparing them. So that's been a really pleasant development since Damselfly came out.
Yeah, that is really great. And I actually, as you were describing it, was thinking to myself, I need to go read this book now and compare myself to Lord of the Flies. I remember reading Lord of the Flies in high school and enjoying it, but also partially feeling like shocked by parts of it, or like, did that just happen? I had a high school English teacher she was fantastic. She was actually like one of my favorite teachers ever, but she ripped that baby apart. It was like, we would read it chapter by chapter, and it was like every other word, something had a symbol, was symbolistic of something. And I was like, maybe I just need to go back and read it, like just to read it and enjoy it without having it ripped apart. But I mean, it was like, does everything have to represent something? Can something like just be an element of the story?
It's true. It's true. That book, I mean, almost page, even sentence by sentence, it's so rich with symbolism and allegory. It is almost mind-boggling. And I learned that, and this is mind-boggling too, it almost didn't get published. I mean, it was rejected from, I think, 15 or 20 publishers at that time. Yeah. So the fact that it not only was published, but then became, a classic is staggering. The author was William Golding, and in his lifetime, it didn't achieve anywhere near this level of readership. It kind of came out. Some people read it, some people didn't. It didn't make much of a stir, but only after time went on did people really start taking to this book.
Yeah, and it is such a fantastic book. And now I definitely am going to have to read Damselfly and read that and compare it to.
It is fantastic. And, there's a million reasons why we read it. But when I read it I think I was in ninth grade, what stands out to me is that my teacher then said that in creating this island that these kids in Lord of the Flies live on, William Golding has created the perfect microcosm. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, no, he really didn't, because this does not represent people as we are. Like, there are no girls, there are no people of color, there's zero diversity of any kind. The boys were all British schoolboys from the same part of, the same part of England. So it's a fabulous book, and it absolutely should be read, but I don't think we can consider it like, this perfect microcosm. And I think that's one of the reasons why this trend of reading young adult books with classics is such a good one, because the kids will kind of see themselves in the YA books. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they'll see themselves in the YA books more than the classic.
I agree. I think that it's really great that that's happening too. And I loved that, going back to how you included the multiracial characters too. I think that that's fantastic, because you are so right. And that there is just not enough representation in YA books with that at all. I just read Faking Reality by Sarah Fujimura and had her on the podcast. And, she has multiracial characters in her book as well. And we talked about that a lot too. And how, just like you said, how important it is to include that, because there really is not a lot of representation. And, I know at the school that I teach at, I have so many students who are multiracial and come from blended families and all of these different things. And it's so important that they see themselves represented.
No, absolutely. I mean, multiracial people in general have been kind of ignored for a long time just by society as a special group. I mean, it wasn't until the year 2000, that people on the census form could even check off more than one race, which wasn't that long ago. So before that, you could only be like one or the other, or, you couldn't even really say who you are. Mm-hmm. So, we've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go, especially in the publishing industry.
Definitely. I agree as well. Something else that I was thinking about too. So as I'm reading the book, okay, and I'm reading about how these girls are going back in times in their dreams, and they're, meeting these new characters and having these relationships, I kept thinking, now this is the sci-fi part of my brain, was like, but if they go back in time and they do all of this stuff, they're going to alter the space-time continuum, they're going to change. Are they going to change what's going to happen? And so I think,
oh my gosh, I thought about that too. And that is such a rabbit hole once you go down it, because every little thing that happens that's changed could have huge repercussions later. And it was hard to even kind of reflect on that,
Yeah.
But part of the book that is a little different, I think, from the average time travel book is that these girls are meeting these historical figures in their dreams. And it's a little unclear at times. Again, I don't want to give anything away, if this is really happening, if maybe the mercury or some kind of toxin is maybe making them hallucinate. There's even a chance that there's a bit of hysteria going around, right? We still don't fully understand this phenomenon of hysteria and what causes it. When, usually almost always it's girls, but they kind of imitate one another and have unexplained ailments. So yeah, there are a lot of ways this book could be interpreted in terms of the time travel aspect.
I like how you did it though. And I like that there is still that element of mystery. Like you're not actually sure if it was really happening or not, or like you said, because it just makes it more intriguing. Like I definitely, as I was reading through it, was like, I don't know if this is really happening or not. Like, is she hallucinating? Is just because of the mercury or like what? But I loved that because it kind of leaves you wondering, and it leaves the reader, to their own imagination to try and figure out what they think versus just like a concrete, this is what it is. Not that there's anything wrong with stories that, give you that concrete aspect of it, because by all means, so many books are like that and they're fantastic. But I just love too that it had that element of mystery about it where you weren't really sure what was going on.
Yeah, I like that too in books. I like there to be some ambiguity in books where the reader can, find their own reasonable result of what they, imagine what they think happened themselves. And as an author, I definitely don't subscribe to this idea that what I intended to write is the only answer. If a reader interprets a character a certain way or a scene a certain way, to me, that's just as valid as what my interpretation is,
Yes, I agree. As I was reading the book and as we were talking about this a little bit earlier with the club that the girls form and how, it starts off really well and then it kind of goes downhill. It almost in a way reminded me of the movie Dead Poets Society. Have you seen this?
Oh yeah, that's such a great movie. I frequently think I want to show this to my boys because it is so powerful and so good. Yeah.
It really
that played a little bit of an influence too.
Maybe subconsciously, because they form their own club and everything starts out great. And then things kind of in a different way start to unravel. It's not quite the same, but the same type of thing happens, but they're boys and then these are girls. But I mean, again, still like teenage relationships, whether you're boys or girls, can be super complicated.
Yeah. And this idea of, just secret clubs or secret societies, I think is universally appealing. I know I was never in a secret society as a teen, but I think if I'd been asked to be in one, I would have been in one. There's something about this idea that is always, always interesting and appealing.
I agree. Because that it's also like something special that you have and that other people who aren't in it they don't know about it. And it's a secret and it's just very intriguing. And you feel like you're a part of something really, really amazing and special. And, for teenagers like the girls and even like the boys in Dead Poet Society, if they've got these like family issues going on, they need somewhere to go, somewhere where they can feel like at least something in their life is stable.
Yeah, some stable and different. They can kind of leave themselves and shed their skins and have this other life that, we would hope would be better, but it doesn't necessarily in this book work out that way.
Yeah.
I don't want to say anymore. I feel like I'm giving too much away.
That's okay. It has a mixed bag of an ending. We'll just say that.
Yeah.
But was there anything else that you want to share about Mercury Boys or maybe about any of your other books that you want to talk about?
Sure. I mean, you can learn about all of my books on my website, which I'm happy to give you if you'd like.
I will actually put a link to your website in the show notes for today, so everybody can check that out.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So it links not only to the website, my general website, but then that general website leads to each book. And if people want to go to mercuryboys.com, you will get to see you'll get to see all the daguerreotypes that are in the book in Mercury Boys, but you'll also get to see a lot of other daguerreotypes. And I have to tell you, there's something about these photographs. I mean, they used to be called mirrors with a memory, because they do have this almost magical quality to them. I don't know if it's the silvery sheen that's part of them or what it is, but there is something just alluring and mysterious about every single daguerreotype there.
They are. I looked through them and I actually just pulled it up so I could look at them again. And they really are just so beautiful and intriguing. Like when I look at these pictures, it makes me wonder about each of these people, you know, who they were. Like none of them are like, I don't even know how to say this. They don't look boring. You know what I mean? Like they all look so interesting. All of the expressions on their faces just say so much, and their posture and some, because there's a couple that are full body. So like their posture, it just tells you a lot about who they could have been. And they're so amazing. I love these photos. Like I'm telling you, I would love to like go back in history and meet some of these people because they look like they'd be so intriguing and just have amazing stories.
That's exactly how I felt when I saw these photos. You know, they're so evocative. And like you said, there is a rich story there. I don't know what it is, but you can't imagine that there's no story there when you look at these photos.
Definitely. Did you, I'm trying to remember if we mentioned exactly this before or not. We might have touched on it, but how did you first learn about daguerreotypes? So was it through just researching the Mercury?
Yeah, I think it all started with Robert Cornelius. So when I saw this information about him, how he had taken, it's so funny to call it this, because if you look at his daguerreotype, you would not think of it as a selfie, but
right.
Supposedly he took the first selfie. I remember, you know, I wanted to learn about Robert Cornelius. And then in learning about Robert Cornelius, you can't help but learn about daguerreotypes. And daguerreotypes were interesting too, because like I said, they were very complex to make and they involved working with a lot of chemicals, but they were also very short-lived. They were popular for about 25 years. And then some of the other photography, like tintypes and ambrotypes at that time, which were just easier to make, those took precedence, and daguerreotypes just kind of went away. But there is something about that daguerreotypes in particular, and it might be that there's such a long exposure time needed. I mean, some of these people had to be perfectly still for 5 minutes or more in order for this daguerreotype to be made, you know, not blinking, etc. So I don't know if it's that, but they are more evocative to me than any other type of photography.
They, like, just from the description of them in the book and from what you've told me today, I mean, they sound fantastic. I've always had kind of an interest in photography, and I need to study it more because then I'll find out more stuff like this.
Right.
But it sounds great. I love it. And yeah, I can't imagine having to stand still for a whole 5 minutes and not blink or anything just to get this picture taken.
Yeah, Robert Cornelius for sure had to stand perfectly still for several minutes. I think even in that short interval when daguerreotypes were popular, they were improved upon. So toward the end of their popularity, you didn't have to be still for nearly as long. But early on, yeah, you had to stand still for minutes at a time.
That's so crazy. Oh my goodness. I would be like twitchy, not be able to do it. But. All right. Well, I thank you so much, Chandra, for being here and for chatting with me about this book. It is so good. If you have not yet read Mercury Boys, it is available and you should definitely go get it and check it out. And again, I will put links to Chandra's main website as well as the book website on the show notes for today. And then Chandra, where can everybody follow you on social media?
Okay. On Twitter, I'm at Chandra Books. On Instagram, I'm at Chandra Prasad Books. And I also started doing TikTok recently, which has been eye-opening. And that one is also Chandra Prasad Books.
Okay. I have not ventured into the TikTok world myself. I think I'm just gonna, I don't know, hold back on that one for now. We'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely a youthful area, but I rely on my teenager to kind of guide me through it.
Yeah, I would need that too. Well, thank you again for being here. It's been so great chatting with you. And thank you, everybody, for listening today. And we will chat again soon. Today's episode featured the book Mercury Boys by Chandra Prasad. I'd like to say a special thank you to Ellen at Books Forward for setting up this interview. And also a very special thank you to Chandra herself for coming on and chatting with me today. Be sure to follow YA Book Chat on Instagram. And don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you get your episodes as soon as they are available. And have you checked out the YA Book Chat Patreon yet? You should. Link is in the show notes for today, and there are plenty of awesome bonuses awaiting you. YA Book Chat was created by, is hosted and edited by me, Leah Stuhler.